We turn now to the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Lindsey Graham. Senator, good morning to you.
Good morning.
The president's up. He's watching, apparently, because he sent out a tweet this morning about you appearing on this program. He said, "Deface the nation will tell Lindsey Graham they must start up the judiciary and not stop." I'm not exactly sure quite what that means, but it sounds like he's giving you marching orders.
I think what he's talking about is oversight of the FISA warrant system that failed. I can promise the president and your viewers that I'm going to call witnesses about
Foreign surveillance.
Yeah, the Horowitz report. You know, McCabe, Comey, Rosenstein, Yates. How did you miss it so badly? How could you issue 4 warrants against an American citizen based on information that was unreliable? But here's what I want to tell the president. I'm not going to be the Republican Christopher Steele. So Rudy Giuliani last night said he's got the goods on Hunter Biden. I called the Attorney General this morning and Richard Burr, the chairman of the Intel Committee, and they told me take very cautiously anything coming out of the Ukraine against anybody. So what I will do is I will get to the bottom of how the FISA warrant system failed and make sure we reform it. It doesn't happen again. I think questions about the conflict of interest regarding Hunter Biden and the Ukraine need to be asked. The State Department had warnings and they ignored the conflict of interest. The whistleblower episode needs to be investigated by Richard Burr, but if Rudy Giuliani has any information coming out of the Ukraine, he needs to turn it over to the Department of Justice because it could be Russian propaganda.
Last time you were on this program, though, in December, you said Giuliani should come to the Judiciary Committee with what he said was a suitcase full of documents he picked up in Ukraine on the Bidens. Are you saying you don't want any part of this anymore?
After talking to the Attorney General and the Intelligence Chairman, that any documents coming out of the Ukraine against any American, Republican or Democrat, need to be looked at by the intelligence services who has expertise. I don't, because Russia is playing us all like a fiddle, and Christopher Steele was played by the Russians. That started the Russian investigation against President Trump. It was all garbage.
Are you saying
I don't want to do the same thing?
Rudy Giuliani is getting played by the Russians?
I don't know. I'm saying that the attorney...
Well, it sounds like that's what you're suggesting.
I'm saying that anybody who's got any information coming from the Ukraine needs to turn it over to the intelligence community. As to Senator Schumer wanting Parnas in the audience, if you don't understand that
this is
Parnas,
one of Rudy Giuliani's business associates.
Crooked as a snake, facing indictment. So Schiff gets called by a Russian hoaxer. I've got photos of President Trump in a compromised situation. To every American politician, you should be very cautious about receiving information coming out of the Ukraine and other countries that may be backed by Russian misinformation.
Does the president know that?
I hope so.
Apparently,
well, if he's watching the show, here's what I would tell the president. I'm going to get to the bottom of the FISA warrant process because it was an abuse of power of the Department of Justice, the FBI, and we're going to make sure that Hunter Biden's conflict of interest is explored because it's legitimate. How could Joe Biden really fight corruption when his son's sitting on the Breeze board?
But can you clarify? You said you talked to Attorney General Barr.
This morning.
This morning. Has the Department of Justice been ordered to investigate the Bidens?
No, the Department of Justice is receiving information coming out of the Ukraine from Rudy.
Already?
To see, he told me that they have created a process that Rudy could give information and they would see if it's verified. Rudy Giuliani is a well-known man. He's a crime fighter. He's loyal to the president. He's a good lawyer. But what I'm trying to say to the president and anybody else, that the Russians are still up to it. Deterrence is not working. So let's look at Hunter Biden's conflict. Let's look at Joe Biden. Vice President Biden, what did you do when they told you your son was on Burisma's board? It undercut your ability to fight corruption. Did you take it seriously? Obviously he didn't. But when it comes to documents coming out of the Ukraine to Republicans and Democrats, be very cautious. Turn anything you got over to the Intel community.
Have you ever said to the president when he repeats things like the idea that there's the DNC server hidden in Ukraine, that this is Russian propaganda that he is repeating and apparently believing? Have you ever said that directly to him?
Well, I don't have any information about the server being in the Ukraine.
But
and
you
it
just
was the
said
Russian.
things coming out of Ukraine should be looked at with high scrutiny because of Russian interference.
My point. It was the Russians who hacked into the DNC, not the Ukrainians. But there are people in the Ukraine that were pulling against Trump because they hated Manafort. To suggest there was no political interference coming out of the Ukraine directed toward the president, I think would be would not withstand scrutiny.
When you have a role as chairman of Senate Judiciary to have oversight of Justice Department.
I'm not in charge of the whole government.
I understand that. However, when you're talking about being asked to do these things and a channel being opened between Rudy Giuliani and the Justice Department, this sounds a lot like this is, in some ways, a taxpayer-funded Oppo research operation against Joe Biden. Isn't this exactly what was at the heart of the impeachment probe to begin with?
No, not at all. There are plenty of people being contacted by folks from the Ukraine. Adam Schiff got contacted by somebody he thought to be a Russian, and he was willing to get on a plane apparently and go find the documents. Schumer believes that Parnas has got the goods. Parnas says, I'm in on it. I've never met Parnas. So Democrats are being played, and I'm not going to be played. So we're going to look at the Hunter Biden, Joe Biden connection to the Ukraine. We're going to ask the State Department, why didn't you do something about the conflict of interest? When the John Kerry's chief of staff was warned about Hunter Biden's conflict on Burisma, what did you do, if anything? That's all legitimate. Rudy says he's got the goods. All I can tell Rudy and anybody else, if you got some information connected to the Ukraine against anybody, go to the Intel Committee, not me.
Yeah, you don't want a part of it right now. We need to finish this conversation because you brought up a number of things. So we're going to have to take a quick break. I do want to say, though, that to this point, nothing has been in any way substantiated in regard to corruption when it comes to Joe Biden himself. His son served on the board and was paid for it.
I just think the media is so in the tank over this issue, it makes me sick to my stomach.
You just
we'll
said,
talk about it in a minute.
Right, but you were saying it needs to be investigated.
Yeah,
You're
nobody's
acknowledging
investigated.
there's no
CBS hadn't sent one reporter.
To Ukraine? Yes, we
Yeah, I don't think you take it seriously.
We are. That's why we're taking a break, and I'm coming back to talk to you about it on the other side of it. So stay with us, all of you. Senator Graham is going to stay with us. We'll continue in a few moments. Welcome back to Face the Nation. We continue our conversation now with South Carolina Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. Senator, we were talking about the president's tweet this morning, the requests that have been made of you in terms of continuing investigations. This morning on Fox, Rudy Giuliani is continuing to say, quote, "You are telling him, not my job, man," when it comes to information he says he's handing over. You were just saying that any information coming out of Ukraine needs to be dealt with carefully and skeptically because it's likely the product of some kind of Russian intelligence operation.
Have we learned anything from Christopher Steele dossier? It was all a bunch of garbage fed to Christopher Steele to go after Trump from
and
Russia.
That's what you think Rudy
and I'm
Giuliani
telling
is delivering,
Schumer,
garbage?
I don't know. I'm telling Schumer, don't vouch for Parnas. Don't put him in the gallery. I'm telling Rudy, you think you got the goods? Don't give it to me, because what do we know? We know that the Russian disinformation campaign was used against President Trump. They hacked into the DNC system, not the Ukrainians, and they're on the ground all over the world trying to affect democracy all over the world.
Who's paying Rudy Giuliani?
I don't know. Here's my message to Rudy. If you got something coming from the Ukraine, turn it over to the intelligence people, the Department of Justice, to any Democrat. You think Parnas has got something on me? Well, then go to the Department of Justice and the Intel Committee. Do not pass this stuff on.
Okay. I want to ask you as well, because you have served in the U.S. Air Force. You are a military lawyer, a JAG. Do you support President Trump's decision to dismiss Alex Vindman, the lieutenant colonel who was serving on the National Security Council, who was compelled by a subpoena to go under oath and testify against the president?
I think his reassignment was justified. I don't think he could be effective at the NSC. As much as I support our military people telling the truth when asked, it's important they do. What have I learned in the last 2 years? CIA agents, Department of State, Department of Justice lawyers, FBI agents have a political agenda, and they acted on it. We found that out through the FISA investigation. As to Colonel Vindman, he was not allowed to be asked questions about his connection to the alleged whistleblower, to people working on ships.
He was asked and he denied.
No, he was not. They did
he was
not
asked during
allow
the
him.
testimony.
They did not allow the Republicans to go down that road.
His
Two
brother
things.
was also marched out
All
of
I
the White
can
House.
say
His
is-
brother also serves in the
Right.
military and had
He has
no connection
He has
to
no
this
right.
impeachment.
Nobody knows this. I can promise you this. He's never been asked questions. Did you leak to the whistleblower? People in his chain of command have been suspicious of him regarding his political point of view.
The National Security Advisor to the President sat in the chair you're sitting in last week and said he was confident that there were no leaks from the National Security Council.
Well, I am not. I want the man to be asked about what he did with the information. I appreciate his service, but there are FBI agents who took the law in their own hands. There are CIA agents who took the law in their own hands. There are Department of Justice lawyers who lied to the court. There's been a movement since President Trump was elected by people in our government
Is this
to take him
retaliation?
down.
Because the president has tweeted basically saying that Vindman was forced out not because of any kind of policy issue, not because of anything else,
Well,
except
Margaret,
for
we're gonna get
what he said was listening in on his phone calls and giving horrendous
We're
reports.
not going to be intimidated against
But doesn't
asking
this-
questions
somebody-
to the whistleblower. Who is the whistleblower?
He is an officer, and he is not allowed to speak out on his own behalf. Neither are his fellow military officers
He was
allowed to
shut
do
down.
so.
I don't know what role he played with the whistleblower, if any, but we're going to look. I like Joe Biden. He's a fine man, but we're not going to give you a pass.
Should
because
Gordon Sondland have been fired as well?
He's a political appointee. He serves at the pleasure of the president. He came before the country
Of
and under
course,
oath.
but it was retaliation.
Gave the story as he said it. We're not going to live in a world where the Department of Justice, the CIA, and the FBI can cut corners, go after Trump, and nobody gives a damn. As to Colonel Vindman, thank you for your service. But I'm going to, hopefully somebody will ask questions of you about the role you played with the whistleblower, if any. And if there's nothing there, fine.
All right, Senator Graham, thank you for
you.
joining us this morning.